Let's try again. Hello! Hello! Okay, fantastic. Hello everybody, my name is Mike. Can I just very briefly ask who's here for the first time tonight?
No, you can't.
Okay, I won't ask that. I'll ask instead, who's been here before? Oh, it's about 50-50, that's alright, that's not bad. Okay, well, just very briefly, welcome everybody to Liverpool Skeptics the pub. The event this evening is put on by an organisation called the Merseyside Skeptics Society. We're a non-profit organisation for the promotion of scientific skepticism on Merseyside, around the UK, and so on and so forth. Skepticism, if you're not aware, if you're not involved in this kind of arena, what we're about is evidence and data, and we're more interested in finding out what is actually true and what is actually the case than we are in actually being right or wrong personally before you start. Someone's not giving a hint. Shush! That's a little bit better. Fantastic. Okay. We do regular events in here for the most part. Actually, we do a lecture on the third Thursday of every month, starting from about 8 o'clock, which is around now. I think we're running more or less the time, just a little bit late. Obviously, the lecture this evening is what you're all here for. Next month, we've got our very own Michael Marshall. Where's Marsh?
Yeah.
There he is. We've got our very own Michael Marshall who's going to be talking about PR and the way that PR is now dominating our news media. So that's going to be in here on the 15th of December from 8 o'clock, and that's going to be fantastic. Marsh is a very good speaker despite the Geordie accent. But that's really wonderful. We also have regular social events which are in here on the first Thursday of each month, again from 8 p.m, which everyone's welcome to come along. There's no guest speaker at that time, you just come along and sit down and have a nice evening and enjoy yourselves. And everyone's welcome to come. You don't have to be a member to come along to any of our events, they're all free for you. Come along and get involved, that's fantastic. One more thing before we move on is we've got a load of Jon's books here, which we've managed to arrange to get down from his publishers. If you would like to buy one of Jon's books, I think we've got most of your back catalogue there. I think we've got most of them there. But if you're interested, you'll be able to buy those in the interval. We've knocked them down from the cover price, and Jon will sign them. So
my entire back catalogue.
Entire back catalogue, fantastic. So if you're interested, we'll be doing that in the interval. You can buy a book and Jon will sign it, and so we'll do that. So I think that's it. I don't think I have any more announcements to do. So massive round of applause, as if I needed to tell you to do that. Massive round of applause, please, for Jon Ronson.
Thank you. I thought I'd start actually before I get onto psychopaths. I thought I'd start, because this is a Skeptics event, with a story about how bad ideas can spread in domestic situations. So this is a little story that I wrote in 2007, which I've never put in any of my books because it was too painful, but I feel like I can do it now. My 8-year-old son Joel comes into my office to ask me if there's a worse swear word than fuck. No, I say. You're lying, he says. There's none worse than fuck, I say. Joel narrows his eyes. I know you're lying, he says. He leaves the room. On Saturday, I take Joel to Chessington World of Adventures. What a crappy theme park. Nonetheless, we have a wonderful day together. You're a great dad, Joel says as we drive home. And you're a great son, I reply with a magical twinkle. We smile lovingly at each other. There is a worse swear word than fuck, isn't there, says Joel. Yes, there is, I say. What is it? I say. Tell me, says Joel. I swear this is just for me. I'll never use it. I just need to know. I'll never use it on anyone. I swear, just tell me. I feel clammy and hemmed in. And you won't tell Mum we had this conversation, I say. Mum will never know. I can't tell you, I say. Tell me, says Joel. I can't, I say. Then why did you almost tell me, Joel yells. Because I wasn't thinking responsibly, I yell. I was swept up in the magic of the moment. You have to tell me, Joel says. It's only fair. I look around the car. For some reason, we have an old can of Italian lemonade down on the floor. It's limone, I say. Limone, says Joel. That's the worst swear word of all, I say. Limone. But I'm holding you to your promise that you'll never use it, okay? Never. Limone, says Joel. He seems disappointed. There's nowhere to go after limone, I say. Limone is the Everest peak of swearing. Joel looks out the window. You know, I say wisely. Sometimes the mystery is better than the knowing, wouldn't you say? Sometimes the journey is better than the destination. Anyway, don't tell Mum. We reach the house. Joel rushes inside. Mum, he yells. Dad told me the worst swear word of all. I know what it is, limone. My wife Elaine appears at the top of the stairs, an inscrutable expression on her face. I shrug anxiously. A month passes. We go for a weekend away. At the hotel, a boy on a tricycle crashes into Joel. Limone, he mutters. Another month passes. Joel has a friend round for a sleepover. At 11 o'clock, I hear them talking. They're saying, limone. I feel terrible about this, I say to Elaine. I've tricked my own son. I'm going to tell him that limone isn't a swear word and is in fact the Italian word for lemon. I pause. I'm going to tell him the actual worst swear word in the world. You are not, says Elaine. I'd rather he was foul-mouthed and accurate than see him like this, I say. And all because of my stupid slip of the tongue in the car on the way back from Chessington World of Adventures. You are not going to tell Joel the worst swear word in the world, Elaine yells. And so I don't. Today, Joel comes into my office. Hi, he says. Hi, I say. Anyway, I'll see you later, says Joel. He turns to leave. Then he turns around. Oh, he says, cunt. Okay, there you go. So I'm here to talk about psychopaths. The statistic, by the way, according to Robert Hare, the man who created the psychopath checklist and has done the studies, is 1 in 100 regular people is a psychopath. So there's 200 people in the room, so 2 of you are psychopaths. Or more if psychopaths enjoy going to talks about psychopaths, which is quite likely because one of the items on the checklist is grandiose sense of self-worth. So there could be like 9 or 10 psychopaths in the room. It could be like carnage. So 1 in 100 regular people, 25% of the prison population is a psychopath, but they're responsible apparently for 60 to 70% of unrest in prisons. So they're the jagged rock thrown in the still pond. And according to Hare, 4% of CEOs are psychopaths. So you're 4 times more likely to have one at the top of the tree than you are to have one at the bottom. So that's the statistics. I'll tell you a little bit how I came to investigate this subject. I was at a friend's house and she had on her shelf a copy of the DSM manual. Do people know the DSM? It's the manual of mental disorders. And it used to be a very slim volume. It was a pamphlet in the 1950s. Not many mental disorders. Now it's a brick. It's 886 pages. It lists every known mental disorder, and there's currently 374 mental disorders. So I was leafing through the book wondering if I had any mental disorders, and it turns out I've got 12. I've got generalized anxiety disorder, which is a given. I've got nightmare disorder, which is categorized if you have recurrent dreams of being pursued or declared a failure. And all my dreams involve people, you're a failure. I've got parent-child relational problems, which, if you met my mother, you know why. I've got malingering, and I think it's quite rare to have malingering and generalized anxiety disorder because malingering tends to make me feel very anxious. So I was looking through the book, wondering whether I was maybe I was much crazier than I thought I was, or maybe it's not a good idea to diagnose yourself with a mental disorder if you're not a trained professional, or maybe the psychiatry profession has a strange fetish to diagnose essentially normal behaviour as a mental disorder. I was wondering if any of those things were true, and I thought it was really interesting, and I wanted to solve that mystery. Much later, by the way, I met the man who turned the DSM from a pamphlet into a brick, and his name was Robert Spitzer. And the reason why he did it, he was very anti-Freud. He had a very unhappy mother who spent her life in Freudian psychoanalysis, and it never worked. She just got worse, and she lived unhappy, and she died unhappy. So Spitzer grew up with a pathological hatred of Freud. And when he got the job editing the DSM, he thought this would be the perfect opportunity to eradicate Freud from psychiatry and replace it with something more scientific, which was basically checklists. So he invited like-minded people along to a conference room that he had at Columbia for about 8 years, and they'd have these meetings, and he'd say, has anyone got any ideas of mental disorders? And somebody would shout out, bulimia! And he'd say, what's its overt characteristics? And he'd sort of type it in, and that's how bulimia came to be invented, and it's how ADHD came to be invented. And I said to him, were there any proposed mental disorders that you rejected? And he said, yeah, there was one. Atypical child syndrome. And he said the problem is when I asked the man proposing it what its shared characteristics were, he said, well, that's very hard to say because the children are very atypical. Anyway, that was much later. I was leafing through this book, and I thought it would be good to meet some critics of psychiatry to get their view on the subject. If I was going to go on a journey, I should meet some critics. So I ended up having lunch with the Scientologists. We've got a crack team of psychiatry busters called the CCHR, the Citizens Commission on Human Rights, and basically they're determined to destroy psychiatry wherever it lies. And in fact, they've hounded bad psychiatrists over the years so vigorously that people have ended up killing themselves and citing the Scientologists in their suicide notes. And so they're a tough crowd. I had lunch with them and I was a bit nervous. I thought maybe I'd end up saying the wrong thing and I'd find myself being, hounded, or maybe I'd end up being too nice to them and everybody would think I was a Scientology apologist. The whole thing seemed fraught with problems. But we got on well over lunch, and I said to them, can you prove to me that psychiatry is a pseudoscience that can't be trusted? And he said, yeah, I can prove it to you. I can introduce you to Tony. And I said, who's Tony? And he said, Tony's in Broadmoor. And I said, what did he do? And he said, hardly anything. He beat someone up or something. Anyway, the main point is that he faked madness to get out of a prison sentence. And they sent him to Broadmoor, and now he's stuck. And the more he tries to convince the psychiatrist that he's sane, the more they take it as evidence that he's crazy. Do you want us to get you into Broadmoor to meet Tony? So I said, yes, please. So I'm going to read a little bit from the book of what happened when I went to Broadmoor. Me and Brian, the Scientologist, went together. We arranged to meet Tony in the wellness centre, which is this it looks like a big travelling. It's like peach and pine, and the only bold colours are the reds of the panic buttons. And Brian said to me, Tony's the only patient in the entire DSPD unit to have permission to meet people in the wellness centre. And I said, what does DSPD stand for? And he said, Dangerous and Severe Personality Disorder. So I said, what, is Tony in the part of Broadmoor that houses the most dangerous people? And he said, yeah, isn't that crazy? So then the patients started drifting in, and they were wearing sweatpants, and they were quite docile and quite overweight. And Brian whispered to me, they're medicated. which to him, as a Scientologist, was like the worst evil in the world. And I'm thinking that's probably a good idea. Then Brian said, oh, here's Tony. And a man had walked in, and he didn't look like the others. He wasn't wearing sweatpants. He was wearing a pinstriped suit, and he was walking towards me with his arm outstretched like someone from The Apprentice, and very good physical condition. It was obviously the suit of somebody who wanted to convince me that he was totally sane. And so he sat down, and I said, is it true that you faked your way in here? And he said, yes, that's exactly what happened. I beat someone up in Reading town centre when I was 17, and I was on remand. My cellmate said, you're looking at 5 to 7 years here, GBH. What you've got to do is fake madness. Tell him you're mad. It's easy. They'll put you in some cushy hospital. You'll have your own PlayStation. Nurses will bring you pizzas. So I asked to see the prison psychiatrist. And I said, well, how did you pretend to be mad? And he said, well, I'd just seen this film called Crash, in which people get sexual pleasure out of crashing cars into walls. So I said, I get sexual pleasure from crashing cars into walls. And I said, what else? He said, so I told them that I wanted to watch women as they died because it would make me feel more normal. And I said, where'd you get that from? He said, from a biography of Ted Bundy that they had in the prison library. He said, so anyway, it turns out I faked madness too well. They didn't send me to some cushy hospital. They sent me to Broadmoor. Took one look at the place, asked to speak to the psychiatrist, said there's been a terrible mistake. I'm not mad. I said, how long have you been here for? And he said, well, if I'd just done my time for the GBH, I'd have got 5 years. I've been in Broadmoor for 12 years. So I'll read a tiny bit from the book. It is an awful lot harder, Tony told me, to convince people you're sane than it is to convince them you're crazy. I thought the best way to seem normal, he said, would be to talk to people normally about normal things like football and what's on TV. I subscribe to New Scientist. I like reading about scientific breakthroughs. One time they had an article about how the US Army was training bumblebees to sniff out explosives. So I said to a nurse, did you know that the US Army's training bumblebees to... Later, when I read my medical notes, I saw they'd written, thinks bees can sniff out explosives. I remember thinking it was lucky I didn't meet any psychiatrists when I was writing The Men Who Stare at Goats, which is full of that kind of stuff. If people who don't know, it's a story about how I met a man. He was part of a secret US Special Forces unit called Project Jedi. I met him in Hawaii. And I said to him, well, what was Project Jedi? And he said it was a series of levels. And I said, what was level 1? He said, level 1, observation. You walk into a room, how many chairs are in the room? He said, the super soldier would just know. And I said, what was level 2? He said, level 2 is intuition. You're at a fork in the road. Do you go left? Do you go right? You go right. And I said, what was level 3? He said, level 3 was invisibility. I said, that's quite a leap from level 2. I said, well, actual invisibility. And he said, at first. But after a while, we adapted it to just trying to find a way of not being seen. I said, like camouflage? And he went, no. He said, level 4 was we had a master sergeant that could stop the heart of a goat just by wanting it to stop. And I said, did he ever do it? And he said, yeah, he did do it one time. But his heart got sick at the same time as the goat's. And I said, well, was the goat psychically fighting back? And he said, no, the goat didn't stand a chance. He said it's what's known in paranormal circles as sympathetic injury. He said one time they had 30 goats in a room, and they put numbers on the goats, 1 to 30, and they're all staring at goat number 16, and goat number 17 fell over. Which I guess is collateral damage. When you decided to wear pinstripe to meet me, I said, did you realise the look could go either way? Yes, said Tony, but I thought I'd take my chances. Plus, most of the patients here are disgusting slobs who don't wash or change their clothes for weeks on end, and I like to dress well. Anyway, so he seemed completely normal to me. He said he didn't like to hang around with his fellow patients. He said on one side of him he had the Stockwell Strangler, and on the other side he had the tiptoe through the tulips rapist. He said so he liked to stay in his room a lot. He found them quite frightening and unsavoury. And they took that as a sign that he was aloof and grandiose. So only in Broadmoor would not wanting to hang out with serial killers be a sign of madness. So he seemed normal, and obviously what did I know? But I left, and then I emailed his clinician, Anthony Maiden, and I said, so what's the story? And he emailed back and said, we accept that Tony's story is true. We accept that he faked madness to get out of a prison sentence because his delusions were very cliched, and the minute he got here, they all just kind of vanished away. However, we've assessed him, and we've decided that what he is a psychopath. And in fact, faking madness is exactly the kind of cunning and manipulative act of a psychopath. So faking your brain going wrong is evidence that your brain's gone wrong. He said cunning manipulative is one of the items on the checklist. And I said, what else? He said pinstripe suit, classic psychopath. What's that? Is that like a sort of fire alarm that's going on? Oh no, that's lucky. My amygdala was just shooting signals of fear and distress up and down to my central nervous system, which means that I'm not a psychopath. A psychopath would hear that alarm and not care at all, because the amygdala doesn't shoot the signals. I'm the neurological opposite of a psychopath. So he said the pinstripe suit, classic psychopath, that's item 1 and 2, glibness, superficial charm, and grandiose sense of self-worth. I said, what else? He said, not wanting to hang out with, the Stockwell Strangler, classic psychopath. Speaks to lack of empathy and also grandiosity. So all the things that seemed most ordinary about Tony was evidence his clinician was telling me that he was a psychopath. He was mad in this different way, which I have to say, back then, before I really knew anything, sounded worse. And in fact, Tony phoned me, and I didn't pick up the phone. And he phoned me a few times, and I didn't pick up the phone. And Tony Maiden said, if you want to know more about psychopaths, you can go on a psychopath-spotting course with Robert Hare, the man who invented the checklist. So I did. I went on a psychopath-spotting course in a marquee in West Wales. It cost me £600 for 3 days, and I am now a trained, and I have to say very, very adept psychopath spotter. I've got a certificate of attendance, which is exactly the same qualification that an awful lot of court experts have when they go to determine whether the person being sentenced is and isn't a psychopath. They've got the same qualification as me. So I can become a court expert psychopath spotter. But I decided what I'd do with my psychopath spotting powers was not put them to philanthropic good, but instead think of all the people over the years who crossed me and see which of them I could out as psychopaths. So obviously there's A.A. Gill, who's a classic psychopath, in that quite recently, about 3 months ago, he reviewed a programme about the Sri Lankan killing fields and said the problem with the programme was that it suffered from too much empathy. Also, he once wrote a column in the Times where he wrote about how he killed a baboon on safari because he wanted to know what it would be like to kill a person. Classic psychopath. Also, he gives my documentaries very bad reviews, which is classic psychopath. And then I actually remembered somebody else who seemed maybe even more of a candidate than A.A. Gill. It was a man called Toto Constant, who I'd met about 15 years ago. He was the head of a Haitian death squad And he'd got away with it because at the same time that he was setting fire to ghettos and, responsible for the killings of countless people, he was also working as an informant for the CIA. So when he had to flee Haiti, he moved to America, and they didn't prosecute him because he said, if you prosecute me, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to tell the media everything I know about the CIA. So instead, he got to move in with his mother in Queens, and he wasn't allowed to leave Queens, but he was allowed to live with his mother. So I thought at the time I was young and a bit stupid, and I thought it would be quite funny to do a documentary about a death squad leader who had to move in with his mum. So I went to Queens, and he was there at the door welcoming me. Even though it was a really hot day, he was wearing a pinstripe suit. Anyway, it turned out it wasn't funny at all. It was completely not funny. All he wanted to do was just profess his innocence all day. He was innocent, and it was very dispiriting for me because I was getting like nothing out of him, just this kind of, there was no empathy, it was just, and at one point during the interview, he started crying, and I looked at him, and it was obvious that he was only pretending to cry. And I'd never had that before. I'd never had anybody pretend to cry in front of me before. And I never did anything with the interview, but now I was a psychopath spotter. I suddenly realised all those odd things about him were classic psychopath. The pretending to cry spoke to one of the items on the checklist, shallow affect, an inability to experience a range of emotions. So I suddenly got really excited, and I decided to try and find him, to interview him again. And it turned out that he was in prison in upstate New York doing 12 to 37 years for mortgage fraud, which speaks to item 20 on the checklist, criminal versatility. So I wrote to him and I said, can I come and visit you? And he wrote back and he said, it would be amazing if you came to visit me. I get no visitors. I'm lonely and I'm miserable, and please come and visit me. So I did, and I'm going to read a little bit from the book about what happened when I visited Toto. Why didn't you come and see me last Tuesday, he asked me. That volcano erupted in Iceland and everything got put on hold, I said. Ah, he said, okay. When I got your letter, I was so excited. Really, I said. All the inmates were saying, the guy who wrote the Men Who Stare at Goats book is coming to visit you. Wow, everyone in here has heard of that movie. Really, I said. Yeah, we have a movie night every Saturday night. Last Saturday was Avatar. That movie touched me. It touched me, John. The invasion of the small nation by the big nation. I found those blue people beautiful. I found a beauty in them. Are you an emotional man, I asked. I am emotional, he nodded. And now I'm thinking I'm wasting my fucking time. Jeez, I've been like 6 hours from New York, not to mention the flight over, and he's obviously not a psychopath. So fucking annoying, which I suppose speaks slightly to item 7, callous lack of empathy. Anyway, a couple of months ago, they chose the Men Who Stare at Goats movie. Most of the inmates didn't know what the hell was going on. They were saying, what's this? But I was saying, no, I've met the guy who wrote the book. You don't understand the guy's mind. And then you wrote to me and said you wanted to meet me again, and everyone was so jealous. That's nice, I said. When I heard you were coming last week, my hair was a real mess, but I wasn't scheduled to have my hair cut. So another inmate said, you take my slot. We switched slots at the barber shop, and someone else gave me a brand new green shirt to wear. Oh, God, I said. He waved his hand to say, I know it's silly. The only little thing we have here is a visit, he explained. It's the only little thing we have left. Who is the unfeeling one, I thought. I only came here to hone my psychopath spotting skills, and this man borrowed a special shirt. And then he started saying to me, I just want people to like me. It's very important to me that people like me. I want people to think I'm a gentleman. If people don't like me, it hurts me. It's important for me to be liked. And finally I said to him, well, isn't that a weakness? Your desperate desire to have people like you. Isn't that a weakness? Ah, no, Toto said. He waved his finger. It's not a weakness at all. Why? I asked. I'll tell you why, he said. If people like you, you can manipulate them to do whatever you want them to do. So you don't really want people to like you, I said. Oh no, he said. I'm giving you my deepest secrets here, John. So I left the prison thinking I was just a genius. I was a psychopath-spotting genius. And I'd cracked him open, and the key had been the word weakness. He didn't want to be thought of as weak. So when I said, aren't you behaving in a weak manner, that's when it opened up the door to his brain, and he revealed his psychopathic inners. And so I felt fantastic. And then I started feeling very anxious and panicky. My amygdala went into overdrive, and I was swerving around the room. I was thinking around the road, and I was thinking to myself, my God, what if he reads the book and kills me? And I thought, okay, no, I'm okay from him. I'm safe from him because he's doing 12 to 37 years. So that's not a problem. But what if like one of his brothers or cousins reads the book and kills me? And so I pulled into Starbucks. I was like panicking, and I was looking through my notes, and I got to the part where he said, I'm completely alone in the world. I have nobody. Everybody who's ever loved me has betrayed me. I'm completely alone. And I thought, oh, well, that's okay. What? Anyway, Robert Hare said to me, I met Robert Hare in a hotel in Heathrow Airport. I'm going to read one more little bit from the book, and then I think we should have a break and then do questions, as long as people want to do them for. Hare was passing through Heathrow, and he said to me, let's meet and have a drink. And so I got to Heathrow. I wanted to kind of fill him in on my adventures with Toto and Tony. And anyway, I couldn't see him in the lobby of the hotel anywhere, and the lobby was very busy, and there was like a long queue for the check-in desk, so I couldn't, phone his room. Then I saw that the concierge's desk was empty, so I thought, okay, I'll go to the concierge's phone, I'll phone front desk, and they'll put me through to his room. So I picked up the concierge's phone, and I was about to dial, and just then the concierge kind of stormed towards me, saying, put down my phone. And I said, hang on a minute, I'm just going to make it. No, put it down. And he grabbed the phone and slammed it down. Which was quite shocking. And then Robert Hare appeared, and he said, John, and I said, Robert, because I wanted to seem like suave in front of the concierge. And we walked away, and I said, you'll never guess what the concierge did. He just manhandled me. He grabbed the phone and slammed it down. It was really upsetting. And Hare said, well, he's one. And I said, psychopath. And he went, yeah. He said, a lot of them become concierges. I said, really? I looked over to him, and he was helping somebody into the lift with their bags. And Hare said, you should put that in your book. I said, I will. And Hare said, he said, forget about some death squad leader, who cares? He said, the big story, and it's the biggest story in the world, is corporate psychopathy. This is the solution to all the great mysteries. Why is there so much injustice? Why are there so many wars? Why is the world so cruel? It's because of a few well-placed psychopaths at the top whose brain anomaly is so powerful it's remolded society all wrong. Capitalism is a physical manifestation of psychopathy, and in fact, capitalism rewards psychopathy. He said, that's the story. Why is nobody interested in that story? He said, what you need to do is go and find yourself a corporate psychopath and interview them. So I did. I started writing to people who were quite possibly corporate psychopaths. And I ended up with one called Al Dunlap, who in the 1990s was America's most powerful and ruthless asset stripper. He'd go into a failing company, he'd close down factories all over America, fire 30% of the workforce, and he always seemed to fire them with a bit of a quip. So, for instance, somebody once said to him, I've just bought myself a new car. And he said, you may have a new car, but I'll tell you what you don't have, a job. And and in fact, he behaved in such a sort of seemingly psychopathic manner. His job cuts were so sweeping and so ruthless that a Fast Company magazine called him a psychopath. So I wrote to him, not mentioning psychopath in the email. I said he might have a special brain anomaly that made him very special. He said, come on over. I'd made the mistake with the Enron people. I'd written to them and Bernie Madoff saying, can I come and visit you to see if you're a psychopath? And anyway, none of them wrote back. So I went to Al Dunlap's place, this giant mansion in Florida, which was filled with sculptures of predatory animals. They were like, it was like Narnia. They were like lions. He would say, look, over there you've got tigers and leopards and more lions and eagles. He was saying this to me in a less effeminate way. Falcons. Anyway, so we went into his kitchen and I said, I said in my email that you might have a very special brain anomaly that makes you fearless and interested in the predatory spirit. And he said, yeah, it's an amazing theory. So it's like Star Trek, you're going where no man has ever gone before. And I said, well, I said, some psychologists would possibly say that this makes you, and he said, what? And I said, a psychopath. And he looked very disappointed. And I said, I've got a list in my pocket of like a checklist of 20 psychopathic traits. Can I go through them with you? And he said, okay. He seemed quite intrigued. So I went through the list. I said, item 1, grandiose sense of self-worth, which would have been hard for him to deny because he was standing underneath a giant oil painting of himself. He said, well, you've got to believe in you. I said, shallow affect and an inability to experience a range of emotions. He said, well, who wants to be weighed down by some nonsense emotion? And I said, manipulative. And he said, that's leadership. So we went through the checklist. He basically turned many of the items on the checklist into like business positives. He kind of turned the hair psychopath checklist into who moved my cheese. I did notice, though, during the day with him that something kind of strange was happening, which was whenever he behaved in a way that wasn't at all psychopathic. Like, for instance, he said no to juvenile delinquency and early behaviour problems. He said because he got accepted into West Point and they don't let delinquents into West Point. He said no to many short-term marital relationships. He's only been married twice. Admittedly, his first wife cited in her divorce papers that he once threatened her with a knife and said that he always wondered what human flesh tasted like. But his second marriage has been very successful. It's lasted 41 years. And things get said in the heat of marriage. So he said no to those. So whenever he said anything that wasn't psychopathic, I thought, well, I won't put that in the book. And it kind of dawned on me that being an adept psychopath spotter had kind of turned me a little bit psychopathic. I was like desperate to shove Al Dunlap into this diagnostic label, and it made me realise that that's what we do in journalism all the time. We travel the world looking for people whose behaviour would be defined as disorders from the DSM for, to write about and to make reality TV shows about. And I think the second half of the book is very much a cautionary tale about don't get drunk with your psychopath spotting powers because it can turn you a little bit psychopathic. Okay, so I think, why don't we have a break for, I don't know how long I was just talking for, but 45 minutes. So should we have a break and I'll sign some books if people want to sign and then come up for some questions and answers in the second half. Okay, thank you very much.
Jon Ronson, ladies and gentlemen.